That night was supposed to be like any other. My husband was asleep upstairs, his soft snores barely audible through the closed door. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. I was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, scrolling through my phone to pass the time. Then I heard it, a soft knock on the door. At first I thought I imagined it, but it came again, louder this time. My heart skipped a beat. Who could it be at this hour? I hesitated, then walked to the door, peeking through the peephole. It was him, my stepbrother, Jake. His face was pale, his eyes wide, like he'd just seen a ghost. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice shaky. I opened the door, and as soon as he stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. Something was about to change. I just didn't know how much. Life had been complicated. That's the best way I could describe it. My husband Mark and I had been married for 8 years, but lately it felt like we were living parallel lives rather than sharing one. He was always busy with work, traveling for weeks at a time, leaving me alone in our big, empty house. I tried not to complain. After all, his job paid the bills, but the loneliness was starting to eat at me. The days were manageable. I'd keep myself busy with work, errands, and the occasional coffee date with friends. But the nights were the hardest. The silence would stretch on forever, and I'd find myself staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was all there was to life. Mark wasn't a bad husband. He was kind, dependable, and hard-working. But somewhere along the way, we'd stopped connecting. Our conversations had become surface level. How was work? What's for dinner? Did you pay the bills? The spark we once had felt like a distant memory. I tried to talk to him about it once, but he brushed it off, saying, "We're just in a rough patch. It'll pass." But it didn't pass. It just got heavier. Then there was Jake, my stepbrother. He wasn't really my brother by blood. He was Mark's son from a previous relationship, but we'd always been close. Jake was 24, just a few years younger than me, and he'd been living with us on and off since he was a teenager. He was the kind of person who could light up a room with his smile, but lately he'd been different, quieter, more withdrawn. I didn't know what was going on with him, but I could tell something was bothering him. Jake and I had always had a special bond. When he first moved in, he was just a moody teenager, angry at the world and his parents for splitting up. I was the one who'd sit with him late at night, listening to him vent about school, his friends, his dad. Over time, he'd opened up to me in ways he never did with anyone else. I became his confidant, his safe space, and in return, he became mine. When Mark was away, Jake was the one who kept me company, who made the house feel less empty. But things had started to shift between us. I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it happened, but there were moments, little things that made me uneasy. The way he'd look at me sometimes, like he was searching for something in my eyes. The way he'd linger a little too long after a hug. The way he'd find excuses to be near me, even when there was no reason to be. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. He was just a kid after all, but deep down I knew it was more than that. The night he knocked on the door, I was already on edge. Mark had been gone for 2 weeks, and the house felt colder than usual. I'd spent the evening trying to distract myself, watching TV, reading, scrolling through social media, but nothing worked. My mind kept wandering back to Jake. He'd been acting strange all week, avoiding eye contact, disappearing for hours at a time. I'd asked him if everything was okay, but he just shrugged and said, "I'm fine." I didn't believe him. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, my heart sank. He looked broken, like he'd been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, and it had finally crushed him. I didn't know what to say, so I just stepped aside and let him in. He didn't say much at first. He sat on the couch, his hands clasped tightly together, staring at the floor. I sat across from him, waiting for him to speak. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know how." My stomach twisted. Whatever it was, I knew it wasn't good. I reached out and placed a hand on his knee, trying to reassure him. "Whatever it is, you can tell me," I said softly. "I'm here for you." He took a deep breath, his eyes locking with mine, and then he said the words that would change everything. I think I'm in love with you." The room felt like it was spinning. Jake's words hung in the air between us, heavy and impossible to ignore. I pulled my hand back from his knee, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what he'd just said. This couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding, anything but this. "Jake, I started, my voice shaky. "You don't mean that. You're just confused. Or maybe you're lonely. It's okay to feel that way, but this isn't—" "I'm not confused," he interrupted, his voice firmer now. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes never leaving mine. "I've tried to ignore it. I've tried to push it away. But I can't. Every time I see you, it's like I can't breathe, like you're the only thing that matters." I shook my head, trying to clear the fog that had settled over my thoughts. "Jake, this isn't right. You're my stepbrother, my husband's son. This can't happen." "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "I know it's wrong, but I can't help how I feel, and I thought maybe you felt it too." I froze. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Did I feel it too? The question echoed in my mind, and I hated myself for even considering it. But the truth was, there had been moments, tiny, fleeting moments, where I'd felt something shift between us. A look that lasted too long, a touch that felt too intimate. I'd always brushed them off, told myself it was nothing, but now, sitting here with him, I couldn't deny it anymore. There was something there, something dangerous. "Jake, this is—" I trailed off, unable to find the right words. "We can't do this. It's not just about us. It's about Mark, about your dad. Do you understand what this would do to him? To all of us?" He looked down at his hands, his shoulders slumping. "I know," he said quietly. "I've thought about it every day. But I can't keep pretending. I can't keep hiding how I feel." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, that this was all just a mistake. But the look in his eyes stopped me. He was serious, and worse, he was vulnerable. I could see the pain in his face, the desperation in his voice. He wasn't just confessing his feelings, he was begging for something, for understanding, for acceptance. And I didn't know how to give it to him. The days that followed were a blur, Jake and I tiptoed around each other, the air between us thick with unspoken words. He didn't bring up his confession again, but it was always there, lurking beneath the surface. Every time our eyes met, every time we brushed past each other in the hallway, I could feel the tension building. It was like we were both holding our breath, waiting for something to happen. One night I was in the kitchen washing dishes after dinner. Jake walked in, his footsteps soft against the tile floor. I could feel him standing behind me, but I didn't turn around. I didn't trust myself to look at him. "Can I help?" he asked, his voice low. I shook my head, keeping my eyes on the sink. "I've got it. Thanks." He didn't leave. Instead, he stepped closer, so close I could feel the heat of his body behind me. My hands stilled in the soapy water, my heart racing. I wanted to tell him to back off, to leave me alone, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stood there, frozen, as he reached around me and turned off the faucet. "You don't have to do everything by yourself," he said softly, his breath warm against my ear. "You're not alone." I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. "Jake, please." "Please what?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me what you want. Tell me to stop, and I will. But if you don't, if you feel it too." I turned around then, my back pressed against the edge of the sink. He was so close, his face just inches from mine. I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. My mind screamed at me to push him away, to end this before it went too far. But my body didn't listen. Instead, I stood there, trapped in his gaze, unable to move. "This is wrong," I whispered, my voice trembling. "We can't." "I know," he said, his eyes searching mine, "but it doesn't feel wrong, not when I'm with you." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the truth was it didn't feel wrong, not in that moment, and that scared me more than anything. He reached up, his fingers brushing a strand of hair away from my face. His touch was gentle, almost hesitant, like he was afraid I'd pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I leaned into his hand, my eyes closing as his thumb traced the curve of my cheek. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't have to fix it," he said softly. "Just be here with me. That's all I need." I opened my eyes, meeting his gaze. There was so much emotion in his eyes, longing, fear, hope. It was overwhelming. And for the first time, I let myself really see him. Not as my stepbrother, not as Mark's son, but as Jake. The person who'd been there for me when no one else was. The person who made me feel seen, understood, wanted. And in that moment, I realized I couldn't deny it anymore. I felt it too. The kitchen was silent except for the sound of our breathing, heavy and uneven. Jake's hand still rested against my cheek, his touch sending shivers down my spine. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, searching, pleading. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, fear, guilt, desire, all crashing together in a way that left me breathless. "Jake," I whispered, my voice trembling, "we can't do this. It's not just about us. It's about Mark, about your dad. Do you understand what this would do to him, to all of us?" He didn't pull away. Instead, he stepped closer, his body pressing against mine, trapping me between him and the edge of the sink. His other hand came up to cradle my face, his fingers threading through my hair. His eyes were dark, intense, filled with a raw emotion that made my chest ache. "I don't care about him right now," he said, his voice low and rough. "I care about you, about us. Don't you see? This is real. What I feel for you, it's real." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "It's not real, Jake. It can't be. It's just a mistake, a moment of weakness. We're both lonely and we're confused and—" "Stop," he interrupted, his voice sharp. "Stop lying to yourself. You feel it too. I see it in your eyes. I feel it every time you look at me. You can't keep pretending this isn't happening." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the words caught in my throat, because deep down, I knew he was right. I did feel it. I'd felt it for a long time, even if I hadn't wanted to admit it. The way my heart raced when he was near, the way my skin tingled at his touch, the way I'd catch myself staring at him when he wasn't looking, wondering what it would be like to give in to the pull between us. "Jake," I said again, my voice breaking, "this is wrong. It's so wrong." "I know," he said, his voice softer now, "but it doesn't feel wrong. Not when I'm with you." His words shattered the last of my resistance. I felt the walls I'd built around myself crumble, leaving me exposed, vulnerable. My hands, which had been gripping the edge of the sink, moved of their own accord, sliding up his chest to rest against his shoulders. I could feel the heat of his skin through his shirt, the rapid beat of his heart beneath my palms. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. His breath was warm against my lips, his eyes searching mine for permission. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't fight it anymore. I didn't want to. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Just this once. Let me show you how much you mean to me." I closed my eyes, my heart pounding in my chest. Every rational thought screamed at me to stop, to push him away, to end this, before it went too far. But my body had other plans. My hand slid up to his neck, pulling him closer until there was no space left between us. And then I kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, like we were both afraid to break the spell. But as soon as our lips touched, something inside me snapped. The kiss deepened, growing more urgent, more desperate. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. I could feel the heat of his body, the way his heart raced against mine. It was like nothing I'd ever felt before, raw, intense, all-consuming. For a moment the world outside ceased to exist. There was no mark, no guilt, no consequences. There was just Jake and me, and the overwhelming need to be closer, to feel more. His lips moved against mine with a hunger that mirrored my own, his hands roaming my body like he was trying to memorize every curve, every inch of me. But then, reality came crashing back in. I pulled away, my chest heaving, my hands trembling as I pressed them against his chest. "We can't do this," I said, my voice shaking. "We can't." He didn't let go. Instead, he rested his forehead against mine, his breathing just as ragged as mine. "Why not?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Why can't we just be happy, even if it's just for a little while?" "Because it's not that simple," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Because this will destroy everything. Your dad, our family. It'll all be ruined, and I can't do that. I can't be the reason everything falls apart." He pulled back then, his eyes searching mine. For a moment I thought he was going to argue, to try to convince me that we could make it work. But then his shoulders slumped, and he took a step back, releasing me. "You're right," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "I know you're right, but that doesn't make it hurt any less." I reached out, my hand brushing against his arm. "Jake, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." He shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "You didn't hurt me. I hurt myself, by falling for someone I can't have." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. I wanted to say something, to comfort him, to make this easier for both of us. But there were no words that could fix this, no words that could undo what had just happened. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, my heart breaking into a million pieces. I sank to the floor, my back against the cabinets, and buried my face in my hands. The tears came then, hot and uncontrollable, as the weight of what we'd done crashed down on me. I didn't know how we were going to move forward from this. I didn't know if we could. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The days after that night in the kitchen were a blur. Jake and I moved around each other like ghosts, careful not to touch, not to speak, not to even look at each other for too long. The house, once filled with a quiet comfort, now felt like a prison. Every corner, every room, held a memory of what had happened, of what we'd almost done. The weight of it hung over me like a storm cloud, threatening to break at any moment. Mark came home a week later, his arrival breaking the suffocating silence. He walked through the door with his usual cheerful demeanor, completely unaware of the tension that had taken root in his absence. He hugged me tightly, kissed my forehead, and asked how things had been while he was away. I forced a smile and told him everything was fine. It was the first of many lies I'd have to tell. Jake avoided him at first, making excuses to stay in his room or leave the house whenever Mark was around. I could see the confusion on Mark's face, the way he'd glance at me and ask, "Is everything okay with Jake? He seems off." I'd shrug and say he was just going through something, that he'd be fine. Another lie. But Jake couldn't avoid him forever. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Mark brought it up again. "Jake," he said, his tone gentle but firm, "you've been acting strange lately. Is something going on? You know you can talk to me, right?" Jake's eyes flicked to mine for a split second before he looked down at his plate. "I'm fine, Dad," he muttered. "Just stressed with work and stuff." Mark didn't look convinced, but he let it drop. The rest of the meal passed in awkward silence, the air thick with unspoken words. I could feel Jake's eyes on me every now and then, but I kept my gaze fixed on my plate, my stomach churning with guilt. That night, as I lay in bed next to Mark, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, replaying everything that had happened over and over again. The way Jake had looked at me, the way his hands had felt on my skin, the way his lips had tasted against mine. I hated myself for thinking about it, for wanting it, even now. But I couldn't help it. The memory was burned into my mind, a constant reminder of what I'd almost lost and what I'd almost gained. I got up quietly, careful not to wake Mark, and slipped out of the room. I needed air, space, something to clear my head. I wandered downstairs and into the living room, where I found Jake sitting on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. He looked up when he heard me, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, his voice low. I shook my head and sat down on the opposite end of the couch, pulling my knees up to my chest. We sat in silence for a while, the tension between us palpable. Finally, Jake spoke. "I'm leaving," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I turned to look at him, my heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" "I mean I can't stay here," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "Not after everything. It's too hard, being around you, pretending like nothing happened. I can't do it." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Where will you go?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe I'll stay with a friend for a while, or find my own place. I need to get away, for both of us." I wanted to argue, to tell him he didn't have to leave, that we could figure this out. But deep down, I knew he was right. This house, this life, it was too small for the two of us now. There was no going back to the way things were. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "I never wanted this to happen." He gave me a sad smile. "I know, but it did, and now we have to live with it." We sat there in silence for a long time, the weight of his words hanging between us. Finally, he stood up and walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. He looked back at me, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and something else I couldn't quite place. "Take care of yourself," he said softly. Then he opened the door and walked out, leaving me alone in the dark. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind spinning. I didn't know what the future held. For me, for Jake, for Mark. All I knew was that something had shifted, something irreversible. And as much as I wanted to believe that time would heal the wounds, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The next morning, Mark asked me where Jake was. I told him he'd left early for work. Another lie. But this one felt heavier than the others, like it was the first step down a path I wasn't sure I wanted to take. As the days turned into weeks, I tried to push the thoughts of Jake out of my mind. I focused on Mark, on our marriage, on trying to rebuild the life we'd had before. But it was hard. Every time Mark touched me, every time he smiled at me, I couldn't help but think of Jake. And every night, as I lay in bed, I wondered where he was, if he was okay, if he was thinking of me too. I didn't know if I'd ever see him again. I didn't know if I wanted to. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe for more emotionally charged, suspenseful tales. What do you think will happen next? Will Jake return? Can the narrator's marriage survive? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your support keeps these stories coming.